Hello again everyone, welcome back to ASMR modelling. Today we are going to be continuing making our speeder bike. I'm going to show you today how to paint camouflage pattern on it. For those of you who know Warhammer 40,000, this is going to be the LA top pattern, Craftworld LA top. And for those of you that don't, it's just basically going to be a few different shades of blue, mainly concentrated around here. So since my last video, which you saw me making the model, all I've done is spray it black, like an undercoat of black, followed by just brushing on some McCrag blue. Oh no, it's Cantor. McCrag. Okay, so to just run down the colours that we're going to be using today, we're going to be using McCrag was our base, but we may go back to that. We're going to be using Cantor blue for our darker colours, a Latop blue for the lighter colours, and finally OF blue for the edge highlights. We'll then be painting the seat Abaddon black, as well as the exhausts, and finally we'll be using Retributor armour to paint the runes just here. So what today we're going to do is we're going to start with our Cantor blue. Shape the paint so that it's not so that it's nice and smooth. And then what we're going to do is you're going to use a large bristled brush, dip it in the Cantor blue, and use it on our palette just here. We're then going to take a small dab of water on our brush, drop off the excess, and just mix it in with the Cantor just to make it slightly lighter. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take our brush and just paint about half of the model in this darker colour. Just sort of splodge it on really. It doesn't need to connect, it doesn't need to have a specific pattern towards it, but what it does need to do is cover about 50% of the model in a nice, smooth, even coat. Just like that. And then we're going to just put a couple of blobs on the sides, on the wings, underneath. One, two, three, four. And then underneath, I'm going to do the same thing. I love the LA top pattern for Eldar. It is my favourite of the Eldar patterns. It's also one of the trickiest, I think, but it does leave a really nice paint scheme, especially on the vehicles actually. So I think that's a decent amount. What I might do actually is just quickly bring a small amount over the blue here, just over the blue, and then a couple of blobs on these bits here as well. Okay, great. Then we wash our brush to get all the paint off, and then to quote Proverbs, we beat the devil out of it. Just leave it to one side. What I might do actually is just quickly grab some tissue paper and wipe the excess paint off. I don't mean to be bragging about the excess toilet paper that I can use for this. And seeing as it's potentially going to be locked down in the United Kingdom very soon, I stocked up on some essentials, by which I mean some models. We're all going to be stuck inside for possibly a long time, so I thought I might as well make the most of it. I'm just going to take a sip of coffee. Good cup of joe. Now, we're going to leave that to dry for a second, so that we can add the second layer of a Latop blue. But while that's happening, what we're going to do is just quickly close that lid. And we're going to take our Abaddon Black, shake it, and do a very similar thing. Take our black on our brush, using a slightly thinner brush this time, more of a detail brush. Going to take some water, just dip it in there, the excess, mix it in, and then we're going to just attempt to paint our seats. What I might do is just zoom in a bit for this for you. There we go. And we just paint each seat panel with our Abaddon Black, trying not to go over the edges, but to quote my hero yet again, there is no such thing as a mistake, just happy accidents. And if we do go over the line slightly, what we can do is we can just go back over it in the blue later. So it's not the end of the world, but to be honest with you, I think I've gone over the edges a little bit there, but never mind. We're going to carry on. I think there's six panels to go through. And just move it slowly through. Oh dear, it's run a bit. Just ever so slightly, sorry about that. The one problem with having a phone to record this is it gets in the way sometimes. But what I'll do is I'll paint first, so that you can kind of see the gist of what I'm getting at. And then what I'll do is when the camera's off, I'll go over the mistakes I've made just in the blue. Because there will be a couple anyway. And finally the back panel. Just here. Focused. There we go. I'm just going to paint the last of that. I think what I've done here is just slightly make the black a little too watery. Unfortunately. A good trick for getting paint into crevices is to water it down quite a lot. It will help it sink into the crevice. Oopsie. Help it sink into the crevice. What I'm going to do is just going to move that again. Just get in the way a little bit. As I was saying, if you paint it, if you get the paint quite watery and then just dip it into the crevices, dab it into the crevices, what you can then get is some nice deep colours. Especially if you use darker colours for something. For this case, the black is black, black is black, so it's not too much of an issue. But when you put this blue here, and these cracks, sometimes it's really good just to be able to use a watery paint just here and kind of bring out that detail. But for now we're just going to paint what we need to paint black. If I need some more paint, see if you're running out a bit. And then once this is done, we'll move back onto the second layer for the blue camouflage. So that's the layer of black. I think we might have to go over that again at some point, but until then we'll leave it at that for now. Leave it to dry. Again, beat the devil out of it. Don't know how loud that's going to be, but it'll be okay. And try again with paper. Then I'll come back out a bit. There we go. Close that window off again. Get back to the larger brush. Take our LA talk. Shake it. Open the pot. Get a small dab of it. We don't need that much this time because it's only going to be a couple of dabs here and there. Work it into the palette. Tiny bit of water. Not even enough to make a smidge. Load it up onto the brush, and then what we're going to do is we're going to just slightly dab it into different areas, leaving a little bit of space between each one. Come around the other side. A bit there. Ooh, a large blob. There. Bit there. Couple of dabs here. Finally one there. Drag that one out. And then we're going to do the same across the whole body of the aircraft. Now you can do what I'm doing with pretty much every shade of colour. So if you wanted to do it green, you do it with different shades of green. If you wanted to do it with white or grey, you can do it with that as well. I don't know if you can hear those crows colouring. And there we go. Wash the brush again. So those are the main parts pretty much done. Although it looks just like splodges at the moment, what you'll find is that when it dries it tends to blend in a lot better. And if you find that it doesn't, then just a couple more coats will usually help that out. Oh, I forgot to say my catchphrase today. It was, are you sitting comfortably? Good. Then we'll begin. I feel like every good SM artist has a small catchphrase or something. And mine's going to be that, if I remember to say it at the start of every one. So, I might just wait for it to dry a little bit more first. I did put, again, a little bit too much water on it, but never mind. So, what should we do next? We just turn this over slightly. Okay. What I might do is I might get my black again and just go over the handles. Oh, it's dried up a bit. Never mind. I will take some more black. I'm not going to water it down because it's just a tiny amount. Nothing too major. The problem with some of these paints is that they tend to dry very, very quickly, and because as you paint on quite small, paints to last very long, so you end up a lot of the time with some very splodgy paint pots. And these are water-based paints, so I assume if I put water in it, it might turn it back to normal. But judging by my mixing attempts today, I feel I might just ruin them further. I'll show you one in a minute that's, well, it was yellow, I think it still is, but it's very, very thick. It's almost gelatinous in its texture, and you have to water it down a lot. And it's weird because none of the other colours I have seem to be doing it. I'll quickly show you while this is dry. So, this is called Avalanche Sunset, and if I open it up, it's not too bad actually. Let's see if I shake it up, it might flick up a bit. See that? The whole paint is this horrible gelatinous texture, and it's not very easy to paint with, and it's definitely not very easy to thin out. Right, how are we doing? I think we're okay now to start with the gold. So we're going to use our highest detail brush this time. There we go. Come on, focus. As you can see, very pointy. We're going to dip in our gold. Just slightly wipe it down. Now, because this has metal flakes in it, you don't tend to water it down, and it doesn't tend to thicken up as much either actually, so there's no need to. And what we're going to do is we're going to get the side of our brush just here, and we're going to sweep it up over these runes, just like so. Now what this does is it stops the paint from going onto the blue underneath, if you're careful. Now, I may have just slightly missed a bit there. My housemate came back and made more noise than a bomb. So what we were doing was we were just using the side of the brush to slightly just sweep across the runes, and what that does is it leaves the blue underneath untouched, but only really paints on the raised areas. That's pretty much all I've done really. I went over the camo a little bit more as well. I don't know if you can tell, but it was basically the same technique that I was doing. I just gave it a couple more layers. So we have a couple of bits left to do, and then we'll be done for the day really. So firstly, what we're going to do is we're going to get our final colour, this HOF blue. So shake it up, and then we're going to open it up, And finally, we're just going to, again, a tiny amount on your brush, because it's only going to be just to highlight the very, very edges of the areas. So there's a technique to edge highlighting, and it's you know, you're only really going to get to do it properly with practice, but you want to find the edges that have the latex or the lighter blue. So it'll be here and here, and then here, here, and here, and so on. As well as like the super raised edges, so the very corners of things, anything that's quite sharp, and that's what you're gonna highlight with this really really bright blue. So we'll just start doing that, and then I'll show you what it looks like afterwards. But basically what it does is it gives any model that you're painting a sort of the effect of being more metal. And you can do it with anything like shoulder pads on the Marines, or you know, or anything really, to be honest, that's metal or you want to define as being quite sharp. And it looks really bright to begin with, but again, it will settle down when it's dried, and it will look really good. And but the key to this is, there you go, see, you just wipe off your finger as well, which is good. The key to this is to just use a really small amount on the corners, a tiny amount. If you use too much, it kind of removes the effect almost. And we're just going to do it on this raised edge here. And the best way to tell whether you've done it properly will be that basically you have to look quite closely to actually tell that it's been done in the first place. It will just otherwise, it will just look like the edge of anything sharp. And this is the most time-consuming part of the procedure, I think, is making sure that this looks like it's been done properly. I've been a lot of times where I've rushed it, and it's just not looked anywhere near as good on some models as it has others. I'm just going to do it on the tips here. As you can see, you can barely tell that it's actually been done. And then the last piece, where's my paint? Is just going to be on the tips of these wings here. Again, really light touch. You can barely see it pretty much. Just on the tips of the wings here. Down here. Another method of doing it is dry brushing it on the I'm just going over it with like a thick brush and dry brushing it on, which is where there's barely any paint on the brush, but you want it to be a thicker brush for a start, and you also want to get an older brush that you're not too bothered about ruining, because dry brushing is probably the single most destructive thing you can do to a brush, really, you can do to a paintbrush, really. So we're nearly there now. Just quickly just do these last bits. Finally, just here as well. And then on the tip. There we go. And I think we're nearly done now. The last thing we want to do is just put some shadow into the recesses of the bike. So the last thing we're going to use, I didn't mention this in this at the start of the video actually, I forgot about it, but the last paint that we're going to use is going to be this one, Dragonov Nightshade, and it's actually more of an ink. Very subtle this, you don't want to load your brush up. Again, we're going to use a really thin brush and dab it in. We're going to just take off any excess. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use the recesses in here and some other places really, and just really bring out that darker detail, the shadowing. Again, another one of those things that if it's done properly, you can't tell it's been done. But if it hasn't been done at all, you can tell it hasn't been done. If you get what I mean. And finally, same here. And then you can go through and you can give it a couple of layers if you feel that it's not prominent enough. But like stuff like this, a lot harder to remove than it is to actually put on. So I always just give it a couple of coats just to make sure. Through here, and just along the edge of this raised section here, along the edge of this raised section here. And then finally just at the bottom here. And that just brings out the darker areas. So you can see here the edge highlighting, just very subtle on the edges here, here, just here. There we go. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to paint these dials here. I might make them black or something like that, but I don't really want to bore you with that. So thank you very much for joining me for another video. Well, Mr. Peace, look, I'll get that later. Thank you very much for joining me for another video. The next video will be something a bit different. It won't be Warhammer. So yeah, tune in for that. As always, like and subscribe, and I really appreciate any traffic that I get at all. And if this channel picks up, I'll definitely be investing in a better microphone and camera. But thank you very much, and I'll see you again soon.